You're listening to 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show, with your host, Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. We've already, fortunately, in the show, we've interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people, coaches, footballers from right around the world. We also have a segment featuring some of the most influential people in field psychology and related fields, and they're very kind to join us on the show as well. So we try and bring Salford to the world to Salford. Today we have a fascinating guest all the way from Italy, which is fantastic. We've got a really, really good insight into what football is like in Italy. It's always good to hear what happens in different countries. Our variety of guests who listen to the show get the opportunity to hear what goes on in different countries, which is all about learning and knowing. He's the head of performance at Parma Calcio women's team. Marco Canolintas, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Glad to be here.
So Marco, just sort of talk us through how you got into coaching. Just for our listeners, how did you get into sort of coaching football?
Yeah, so obviously I was an athlete in my childhood. I was a swimmer, and my dream, as probably like every child, was to make it to the high level, so Olympics in this case. But I couldn't do it. Not really good genetics to do it. So when I finished school, I knew that sports was my love. Like I wanted to devote my life to it. So I decided to take on the other side, and I enrolled at the University of Rome to do a bachelor degree in sports science. And from there, my journey starts because I started like coaching, and I just fell in love with it because I didn't think I could to be an athlete, but when you're an athlete, you just take care of yourself. When you're a coach, for me, it's like to take care of a family, so you need to be a really good person, and it's something I really like.
Yeah, that's really interesting how sort of, like you said, you sort of started your career as an athlete, swimming, and obviously into football, and you've coached you've been in the UK as well. I mean, how would you compare the football? Are there any sort of differences in terms of the football in the UK that you can think of in terms of training compared to? I mean, obviously, every club is different, but just as a generalisation, what do you think some of the differences are between football training in the UK and Italy?
Yeah, I think it's all about culture, because obviously people from UK are totally different from people of Italy. And just to be more specific, for example, in Italy, we try to achieve the most with the least. So we want to be very efficient in what we do, and it's the same for athletes. So the main difference that in the UK, for example, athletes, players already be 100%, doesn't matter why or what. In Italy, we want to know what we're going to do, because if we can make the same thing with less effort, then we're happy. So it's something that is kind of good in sports, in football, because you want to be efficient, obviously, but in training, not always, because there are some days where you really want to push athletes, and I found that in Italy it's a bit harder sometimes because of this reason. So I would say that's the biggest difference. And obviously more specific to training background is totally different, because athletes
Yeah, it's really interesting how you mentioned the training, the different perspectives of training in Italy and England. Mark, I think it's really interesting stuff. To be fair, it always intrigues me how different sort of countries approach their training. But in terms of women's football in Italy at the moment, where would you say? I mean, women's football in the UK is sort of growing. They've experienced some success. We've also seen the Italian women's team. It looks like it's sort of growing as well and getting some good results. But what's the competition like for women's football in Italy, Marco?
Yeah, I think the the biggest difference is about mentality and training culture. We know that in the UK, football is more developed in women's, just because it's a process. It takes time. I just started here in the UK, whereas in Italy it became professional from this year. So obviously we'll have like a huge improvement for the next years, but it will take time, because like a lot of players, they're now playing in Italy and have been playing in Italy for 5-6 years. They were already here when football was now professional. So like everything around that, the way you train, the way you approach like your life, even if outside the pitch, because we know how much this is important for performance. And it was all different. So now it's becoming more professional, because there is more money, more like better structure. So and players I think they just need to get used to that, because it's a dramatic change of mentality and mindset around training, and it's a process, so it takes time, and definitely will be better. But for now, it's just a difference.
Yeah, it's and in terms of your role at Parma, so is it like Parma? Do you guys train full time? Does the team train full time, or do they train the team train part time? And what sort of like tier of football are you guys in? Is it like first, second? Which league are you in? And just for the listeners, and how often do you train?
So Parma now is in the first division, which is the highest level in women's football in Italy, and it's full time. So every club in the first division, but I think most of them also in the second division are full time right now. So you can live with that, and we train in the morning. And then all the morning, it's based around training, around warm up, all these kind of things. And then we have lunch, and then obviously the afternoon is free, so the players, can regenerate and be ready for the next day. So it just evolves all around football now.
Wow, that's really interesting stuff. And do you have like an academy there as well? Is it? How do you sort of how do you recruit players in terms of is there like a development where players can come through from, like, for example, is there a youth team as well? Is it first team? How does that sort of work in terms of the structure of the program? Like in the UK, you've got like the School of Excellence or the Academy. Then you've got the apprentices, the under 18 type thing. Do you guys have that as well in Italy?
Yeah, obviously there are academies, but as I just mentioned before, it's a process. So right now, I think probably the 4 or 5 biggest clubs have really good academies, so they can train the same way first team training. And that about coaching staff, about structures, budget. Whereas for the low level teams, so not the biggest one, there is still a big difference, and that's in terms of money again. So obviously the way these girls train when they're young is not 100% optimal, let's say, to facilitate their development. But again, it's a process. I think in the next years more money will be put also on developing the young athletes, because that's a way to reach really top level. So for now there is still a gap to try to bridge, but I think we're working it really well. So
no, that's really interesting. And in terms of the Parma at the moment, sort of how's the season going for you at the moment, Marco? What sort of in terms of your season so far, how would you sort of describe the season at the moment for yourself, for the team?
Yeah, obviously a tough season, because Parma women was just born this year. Yeah. So there wasn't the previous year, so everything started from scratch. And I don't mean just the players, the staff, but all the people involved working for the club. So at the beginning it takes time, because we're all humans here, so we need to get to know each other. And obviously the goal for this year is not to be relegated, to stay in the league and maybe try to do better in the next years. And we're not in a good position now for the league table, but there are lots of game yet to try to catch up and achieve this goal.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And in terms of your sort of input, I mean, what does a head of performance do at the club? I mean, what's sort of generally your role? I know obviously sort of, I'm sure there's a lot to what you do, but generally what sort of would you do as a head of performance, just so the listeners can get an idea what a head of performance would do at a football club in Italy?
Yeah, so obviously as head of performance, my goal is not just to take care of the fitness of the athletes, but try to align the different departments on the same way. Probably that's the toughest responsibility, again, because everybody here is new, so we need to get to know each other, and try to coordinate everybody to achieve the same goal, which at the end of the day is try to win the match. So focus on recovery, nutrition, and all this kind of stuff. So obviously that's the biggest responsibility, align with training in the team, in the gym, in the pitch, and be prepared for the games.
It's really interesting, sort of like how sort of really it sounds really professional, what you do, and a lot of attention to detail. Just out of interest, Marco, in Italy do they use like we've seen like sports psychology in the UK come into football over the last few years? It's been in sport in general for a long time, but we're seeing it more and more. Even in the women's game, we're seeing the sports psych. I mean, do you do anything around like mental skills training, like sports psychology, that area as well, or is it just mainly the technical, tactical fitness work that the club does?
Yeah, that's a good question. We don't have anything like that at the moment in Parma, but for example, last year when I was at Napoli Women again in the first division, in the staff there was a mental coach, and it was the first time for me to experience something like that, and I found it very useful, because these girls, these women are just sometimes fragile, because the business is developing, so there is huge pressure on the games. Some of them they're not just ready, not to perform, but to win all this pressure. Which is really huge. So I think it's very useful for them to confront it with someone who's experienced that, who can take care of the mental side, because obviously that's a big factor to stay healthy.
Absolutely.
And win the games.
Absolutely. And just out of interest, how was your experience at Napoli, Marco? How was the experience with the Napoli team, women's team? That's interesting in terms of, do they play in the top league, the Napoli team as well in Italy?
I mean, the men's and women's Napoli is not the same club, so they share the same name, but the clubs are two different owners. So obviously, I know this year the men's are doing a really good job, and I hope they can win the league. But the women's, that season again was tough, and there was a change of staff, so I had to leave mid-season, and then the team got relegated. But it's an experience like I really enjoyed. It was very important for me because it was the first time in professional football here in Italy, so I'm glad that I was there.
Yeah, no, that's interesting, sort of like how in terms of the being two separate clubs. I mean, it's similar in the UK where the same sort of principle. Some of the clubs, they kind of share the ground and training, but some of the clubs are completely separate as well. Is Parma like anything to do like the men's as well? Is that separate too, Marco? Like like Parma Calcio, is that separate to the men's? Or do you get to use the training facilities of the men's at all, or just completely separate as well?
No, it's not separate, so that's a good thing. We share the same training ground. We share lots of ideas with the men's staff. So, I mean, the project here is to try to align the men's and women's. The owner really cares about the women's side here. Is try to develop that. That's why this project is very interesting, and I think they're doing a really good job on that, because for the women's to catch up with the men's, it takes a lot of competency, let's say, and with the help of the men's side, I think the club can do it.
Yeah, and what sort of crowds do you get in Italy for the women's game? We're seeing in the UK now the crowds are getting sort of bigger and bigger, and in terms of like club football, what sort of crowds I know obviously different teams are going to have different sort of numbers attending, but as a general rule, Marco, what sort of attendances do you get in Italy for women's football?
Yeah, that's like still a low point, let's say, because it's not very. I mean, the game is not very crowded. For example, I don't know. You could find around sometimes 500, maybe 1,000 people. There is only like very few clubs that can have like a really big crowd, and but it's all about getting to know this business, because football in the previous year was not something really developed. So right now I can see that people are starting to to know this business, and they're getting close. So I'm sure it will be very crowded in a couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, definitely. Sort of like we've seen it coming a long way. And like in terms of the Italian national team, the women's team, does that kind of inspire players to play? I mean, in terms of how important do you think it is that the Italian women's national team do well to maybe inspire some of the younger players? They can watch and see the national team and think, well, there's an opportunity here for maybe to sort of become a national team player at some point.
Yeah, obviously that's the dream of every children, so every girl, and they do whatever it takes to try to reach that goal. So this year there would be the World Cup, and that's a big pressure for the Italian women's, because they just won it. So I mean, it's a good team, because the national team is something that can align all the others from every club to be better. That's good.
No, absolutely. And in terms of sort of your sort of vision, Marco, I mean, obviously I'm sure you've got your sort of goals, and you're going to, obviously your main aim is to sort of do the best you can for Parma. But in terms of what would you say what can you sort of like maybe share with our listeners in terms of your vision, in terms of you just want to obviously make sure that Parma keep progressing and sort of keep working their way up the table? Is that sort of your main aim at the moment, professionally?
Yeah. Obviously, I've been in the women's business for a couple of years now, and I start from when there was not like such a big thing around. Now it's developing, so I really look forward to see the progress that we make, and try to contribute to that, because I want to be part of this big family. So
absolutely. No, it seems like there's a great opportunity, and I think it's great as well for the game as well, for the women's game in general, to have to become professional and have full-time training, and that gives the opportunity to sort of for players to fulfil their potential. But it's been really fascinating getting an insight, Marco. I found that really fascinating. Now that our listeners have found that really interesting too, in terms of your perspective of the game in Italy, that's for sure. So I really want to thank you for coming aboard the show. It's been a fascinating insight into women's football in Italy, as well as obviously Parma as well, and really great speaking to you. So I want to thank you for coming aboard the show. That was Marco Canolintas, all the way from Italy, head of performance at Parma Calcio Women, who's really kind enough to join us on the Friday Sports Show, Salford City Radio, with your host Jimmy Petruzzi on 94.4 FM, the Friday Sports Show.